Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I hope to answer many of your questions with 10 things beginners want to know how to do inside of GIMP. So the first topic we're going to be talking about is how to remove a background from an image. So there are many selection tools available for you to use inside of GIMP, but the one that I prefer to use for a topic such as this is the Scissors Select tool. Because when you take the Scissors Select tool and you zoom in, such as Control Middle Mouse Wheel, and then when you start clicking around the body, trying to get a rough shape to isolate this person from the background, you're going to notice that in between 2 points, it's going to automatically determine what the size and shape of it. It's going to try to automatically determine the outline of the shape you're trying to separate. So it doesn't need to be a person, it could be a box, or really any shape, even complicated ones. It's just that the more complicated the shape is, the more points you're going to have to set up so that GIMP can figure out roughly where the edges are. Now, any place that you have an issue, such as where, let's say you need to add another point, you can simply left-click on the line using the Scissors Select tool, and if you already have a point, you can drag it around. And whenever we let go of a point, it's going to automatically recalculate between the adjacent points, so we get a really good outline of the person's body in this case. So I'm going to keep going around here rather quickly, and you'll see just how powerful the Scissors Select tool really is. So here's another point where I need to add in an extra because it's kind of going off of the person's skin. So I'm going to left click in here, add another point, bring that close to the skin, and maybe we need to do it a couple more times. So you just kind of keep adjusting. Maybe we drag some of the other points as well. Now, in order to complete the circuit, we simply need to click on the initial point, and now with that, we have a full selection of this person. If we click inside the boundaries now, what's going to happen is it's going to convert this scissors selection into a regular old selection. Now, with the image layer selected, I'm going to hit Control X to cut that person out, and I'm going to paste it onto a new layer. So, hitting New Layer, and now I just hit Control V to put the person back in. And now, with the original background layer, I can simply disable that. You'll notice, of course, that inside the person's arms, and between his leg and his arm over here, that a part of the background still remains. So in order to cut out the background from the areas inside of the person, we're going to go ahead and use the same process. So, scissors here, and I'm going to go around this area. Now, when you have very thin things here, like his earbuds going through, the scissors tool might not be the ideal tool to actually select this area. So you can either choose to just kind of cut that out and not worry about it, or you can get more precise with some other tools. So let's just go ahead and work here and try to get a rough cut out of this. So for the sake of showing you guys, I will try to get this area as well so that the earbuds still show in the final image. And we'll get this section too, and then we'll worry about the earbuds. Just try to make sure that if you have an item that you do want in the final image, that the scissors doesn't accidentally cut it out. You can do that by just adjusting these points until you get it with the right selection, roughly speaking. So let's just keep working around here, and then we'll try to finalize it by using some simple brush stroke tools. Okay, so I'm going to make this selection here, cut that out. So now I'm going to go back in here with the eraser. I will lower the size down to, let's say, 4 pixels or so. And then I'll just zoom in really close here, and I'll try to take care of it. So for single pixel edits like this, I recommend you would have hard edge turned on so that when you actually remove some of these light pixels, they're gone completely just by clicking on them once. Okay, and that's not too bad for there. So you can obviously spend a little bit more time if you want. I'm going to just wrap up this part over here, and then we'll move on to the next part. Now, if you accidentally overselect an area like this, you can actually adjust that using, let's say, the rectangular select tool. If you hold Control down while you draw these rectangles, it will remove pixels, wherever the rectangle has, from the current selection. So doing this, we can kind of fine-tune what we got with the scissors tool. Okay, so that's not too bad. You can, come over here, customize it a little bit more. But in general, that's going to be not too bad. So when you're ready with your selection, just go ahead and hit delete, and you get rid of it. And by doing that, you've basically isolated a person from the background, which would allow you to either add in a new background or move the person to a different image. So next up, number 2, how to create guides inside of GIMP. So guides are these little lines that go across your document. They don't actually show up when you would print an image out, but they allow you to do things like snap objects or images to certain areas of your document. So for instance, if you wanted to center things horizontally and vertically, you would want a vertical and a horizontal guide, both at 50%. You can do that by going up to the image menu. You go down to guides, and you can do new guide either by pixels or by percent. So if you do percent, by default, 50% means it's going to take the number of pixels all the way across, and it's going to put a guide halfway. Now, when it's horizontal, that means it's going to go left to right, so it'll appear like this. But if you make it vertical, it'll go top to bottom. So whichever you want, you choose the direction. The percentage across, so percentage would be left to right if it's vertical, and percentage horizontal would be top to bottom if it's going across. So 50% vertical would be like that. And then you can come in here and do 50% horizontal, and it'll look like that. Now, if you turn on snapping by going to View and then Snap to Guides, you can take any object, such as this person we cut out, and you can have it perfectly snap to the center of your document just like that. Now, it doesn't have to be the center of your document. It can also just be centered vertically using the horizontal guide, or centered horizontally by using the vertical guide. But you can also do something like put them, let's say, horizontal and 200 pixels down. If you want something 200 pixels down from the header, so you could snap it to there, or you could use these guides if you're doing something like web design to make sure that, only header stuff should be above there and everything else should be the rest of the web page. Whatever you need the guides for, that's how you can find them, that's how you can use them, and that's how you can snap to the guides. Okay, number 3 is going to be how can you change the color across an entire image and still have it look reasonably good, still keep the overall look of the image intact. It's just you want to do something like, say, change day to night or sunset to morning. Well, you can do that by going up to the Colors menu, and there's something called Hue Saturation. If you go to this menu, it's going to be defaulting to Master, which means as we adjust the selected color down here, that it's going to be affecting all the different color ranges, red, magenta, blue, cyan, green, and yellow, simultaneously. So we're basically shifting the color of the entire image all in one. You can, of course, do it individually as well, but if you do that, you kind of get wacky results. So just taking master color and shifting the hue, you can see how immediately we can change the color of the image. And not only that, but we could also reduce the lightness to, say, make it a lot more darker. We can decrease the saturation as well. And keep adjusting the color until you get something like you want. So just by doing that, we can already kind of turn that dusk into something more of a night. So just by doing that, we can radically change how an image looks overall, but it's still the same image. We still have all the objects, the lighthouse, the boat, etc. And when you're satisfied, you can hit OK. Now, obviously, it's not perfect. It's not going to all in one for, let's say, changing day to night. So if you wanted to take this a step further, you can, of course, try out some of the other color effects that are available in the Colors menu, which are going to be really useful for, obviously, changing the color of images inside of GIMP. So number 4 is going to be creating a path and then making a selection from that path. So the Paths tool over here is similar to the Scissors tool in that it allows you to click around on your screen and create points, which by default are going to be connected to each other with a linear line. If you left click and hold, it's actually going to create a Bezier curve between your points. And as you go around, you can basically create a path, which later you can create a selection from. So when you're finished with your path, you simply take the last point and the first point, and you hit Control to connect those two. But this does not give you a selection. In order to actually convert your path to a selection, go over to the Paths window. If you don't see that inside of GIMP, you can open it by going to Windows, Dockable Dialogues, and then Paths up towards the top. And we take this path, we right-click it, and we go Path to Selection. So now, with this selection, we can cut part of any image or any part of a layer out, and then we'll be able to, say, paste it in, manipulate it, whatever we want to do. So you just create the path, you go over to Paths, you right-click it, and you do Path to Selection. So number 5 is going to be how to remove acne inside of GIMP. So the best tool for doing this, especially with small problems like this, is called the Healing tool. How the Healing tool works is we hit Control and click on a good skin area, and then we hover over a bad skin area and we start drawing by left clicking and holding down the brush stroke, but of course we need the size way higher than that, so I'll make it something like 24. And what it's going to do is kind of automatically figure out, based on this area, how should the skin look if it was going to be flawless. So by taking that close to perfect skin, we go over this slightly less perfect skin, and we left click, we hold down, and we just kind of draw over it. And what you'll notice is that that acne spot that was there before is basically gone, but it's done in a way that it's less obvious to tell how it was before. I mean, if it's still kind of pink like that, you can go over it a second time. Just the more you use it, the slightly more obvious it'll become. So play around with it a little bit and you should be able to get pretty decent results there. So let's just go ahead and keep working on the face here and improving it. You just Control left click, set as source, and then you left click to draw over a spot where you think it's not as good as it could be. By the way, it does also work with things like wrinkles. So if I go here, I can start removing some of these wrinkles. I can also work on the one over here. Now, of course, if you have any areas where it looks like it kind of copied from the original source here, you probably want to try to make sure that anything that was there once doesn't get repeated. So you can basically healing brush over that one more time and get it how you want it to look. So let's work on the neck a little bit too. By the way, if you can get a similar colored area like this, that's going to work pretty well. So you do want to have your source somewhere close to the actual spot in question. And we'll go here to heal over this a bit too. And we zoom out, and we've cleaned up the face a lot in just a minute or two. So that's basically how you do acne inside of GIMP. So number 6 is going to be, how do we crop an image inside of GIMP? So this one is actually really easy because in GIMP they give you a crop tool right over here. It looks a lot like a knife's edge. So what this is going to allow you to do is select a square area of your image. You can also go over to the tools options if you want to make it a very specific ratio or a very specific size, aka if you want to do YouTube thumbnails, for instance. So what we can do here, if you want to manually set the area, is to left click, drag a box, and let's actually make it one that we might want. So I'm going to left click over here, and we'll drag over here to the bottom right, just kind of focusing on the face here. And once you have that, if you have it perfect, you can hit enter. If you want to adjust it a little more, it'll give you these different indicators on the sides and the corners, so you can drag and adjust it a little bit more until you have it perfect. But once the area that is lit conforms to your expectations for what you want the cropped image to look like, you simply go ahead and hit enter. It's going to crop away the rest of the image, and you now have a decreased image size in order for you to work with. Okay, number 7 is going to be, how can you lighten up or darken part of your image? So there's a great tool for this called Dodge Burn. It's the bottom right inside of the tools options. So using the Dodge tool, you can selectively lighten part of your image, and by using the Burn tool, you can darken part of your image. So in order to do this, I would recommend that you actually right-click your layer and you duplicate it so that any changes you make on the layer can be reverted by going back to the previous layer. You can just hide or delete this one if you're unsatisfied. So by clicking on the Dodge tool, we can go down here, select either Dodge or Burn, Burn for dark, Dodge for light. I would recommend you turn the opacity down a lot lower than 100%. I was working with something like 33 here, because when you have 100% opacity, it is a very, very obvious effect. And then you could just kind of select the area that you want to lighten up. So let's just say we kind of wanted to smooth out these eyes a bit. You may also want to decrease the brush hardness so that it's less obvious where the edges are on your dodging. Okay, so let's go ahead and lighten up these eye areas here. And obviously, the larger your size is, the less precise this is going to be. So I'm going to actually lower this down to about 50, even though I'm not going to stress it too hard. And I'm just going to take these eye socket areas and lighten them up a bit. As long as you don't let go, it's going to be applying one layer of dodging. So it won't reapply itself multiple times, the same effect, unless you actually let go of the left mouse button. So by doing that, we can just take that eye and make it quite a bit brighter. And we can come over here as well and do the same thing with the second eye. Notice it also affects things like the brightness of the eye color. And so now if we want, we can just do something like, and now if we want to see how it looks with and without the dodge effect, we can simply disable this new layer, which by the way we should probably rename. So I'm going to double click the name of this layer and rename it Dodge Adjustment. Okay, misspelled. There's no E there. So let's see. Okay, and now we can disable that and re-enable it, and you can see the difference before and after the dodge adjustment. So whatever you want to lighten, darken, once again, pretty much the same idea. You would just be darkening part of your image. So if I wanted the forehead to be darker, you can kind of see the effect before and after, right? Okay, so number 8 is going to be how do you add symbols to a GIMP document. So if you've ever worked on Photoshop, you know that in Photoshop they give you plenty of preset symbols, which you can basically stretch around like vector graphics in order to make the right size of an arrow or a heart shape or a music note or whatever that you want inside of Photoshop. So in GIMP, there's a few easy ways to create simple shapes like hearts and circles. Obviously, that would be doing something like using the ellipse select tool, creating an ellipse or an oval, and then going to edit, fill with foreground or background color. You, of course, would change your foreground and background color to the color you want before you do this, but you can fill that in really easily. Same thing with doing a rectangular shape. So in order to get more complicated shapes, what I would recommend doing is using ASCII symbols. So ASCII symbols are things like arrows and music notes, which exist as text stored in your computer. So basically a bunch of symbols which you can technically type out if you use these codes. So what we can do with any of these symbols that exist inside of ASCII is copy the symbol itself rather than the text code, go back into GIMP, create a text box, and then paste the symbol in. So this will work with pretty much any symbol that exists within ASCII codes, and there are a lot of them. You could also look up Unicode. It will basically give you the same things. So if I want something like an arrow pointing both directions with 2 lines going through it and a cross through it, well, I can just copy this code, paste it in as text, and there you go. And not only can we just paste it in, we can also adjust it to any size we want. We can change the color of it. So you can see how these text-based ASCII symbols can be very, very useful inside of an image editing program. Now, a third option you can try out is literally just to go into Google, search for some clip art. So like you want a house clip art, just type in house clip art. And what you can do is you can just take these images and you can use them inside of your GIMP documents. Now, for commercial purposes, you may actually need to find ones that have the right usage rights. So for instance, you come here for usage rights, you can do labeled for reuse with modification, and then that'll give you some clip art that you can actually use in commercial projects. So for instance, let's just go ahead and grab this image. So I'm going to right click and open this link in a new tab. I'm going to copy this image and we can post it into a new layer inside of GIMP. Now, because I copied it straight from the web and it's a PNG, the background color sometimes gets a little funky, so if you have a PNG with a transparent background, I'd recommend actually downloading it to your computer before you bring it into GIMP. But aside from that, you can get really easy clip art symbols, you can get ASCII symbols, and you can even make some basic shapes inside of GIMP. So number 9 is going to be how to add in drop shadow, which is an incredibly common thing you're going to need to do with text. So for instance, I grabbed this image, and let's say I wanted to add some text on it. So usually text is going to be either white or black. In this case, I want to make it white, okay? So we take the font color, we make it white, we type in, let's say, tutorial, and that doesn't actually look too bad on this image, but if I put it somewhere like where it's really bright, like right about here, you can see that the text becomes hard to read because white and very bright lights don't really go all that well together. They kind of overlap. So what we want to do is actually add in drop shadow. So if we right click on the text layer we've just created and do alpha 2 selection, we can go up to the filters menu, go to light and shadow, and choose drop shadow from the list. Now usually I like to bump up the opacity for the drop shadow to make it very visible and also increase the blur radius, especially with large text like this. So I'll just make it 25. We hit OK, and it will automatically calculate some drop shadow for us. So you can see how just by doing that, the text became way more visible against this kind of bright yellow background, simply because the text now has some dark black shadow behind it. Now, of course, you can do this with any layer, any image. It doesn't need to be text. So I'll go grab that person we created in the first part of this tutorial, and I'll paste them onto a new layer here. So right there, maybe I put them behind the text layer by, well, first I have to make that a new layer. So to take a floating selection, you right click it and you make it a new layer. Drag that, put it below the text. And now what we can do is go up to filters, repeat drop shadow, but usually I will alpha 2 selection just to make sure that it actually gets the right area. So repeat drop shadow, and now if we look at it, this person has a drop shadow too. If I hit Control Z, you can see it without the drop shadow, with the drop shadow, without the drop shadow, with the drop shadow. Okay, so number 10 is going to be how can we take an image, like for instance the sea scene, and put it on a computer screen or a cereal box or anything else using the perspective tool. So to get started, we would of course go to our image, put inside a separate layer, and then we use the perspective tool. We click on our object, and then at a very basic level, we have to put the 4 corners to correspond with the scene behind it. So it's kind of hard to see at the moment, so what I'm going to do is actually lower the opacity on the sea layer. And what that will mean is when we're working here, we'll be able to see kind of a ghost of the previous image, and we'll be able to get those 4 corners much easier. So get a rough estimate of the 4 corners to begin with, and then we can zoom in and kind of finalize it. So that goes roughly up there, and now we'll zoom in here, get it to be about there, in the bottom left-hand corner, moving that to there, then over here, get that to that corner, and finally at the top right we want that to be roughly there. So now we can go ahead and hit transform, and at a very basic level the image is now on the screen, though if we hide it and enable it, and hide it and enable it, you'll notice that there's actually some lighting differences. So this image is still lit exactly how it was originally, like flat lighting all the way across. It's not lighter here like it should be. So if we actually want this image to correspond with the original lighting of the computer screen, what we can do is we can change the mode of the sea image from normal to lighten only. So now with that simple change, the lighting on the outside of the monitor kind of corresponds with the inside, and it looks a lot more realistic. So that's how you would take an image and plaster it onto some other surface, like a computer screen, a television set, or a cereal box inside of GIMP. And that brings us to our conclusion. So that was 10 things beginners want to know how to do inside of GIMP. I hope you found this video to be fascinating and helpful. I've been Chris, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in my future video content.